Hello, I just wanted to do a quick video lesson on my trade on FRC today, the HALT panic setup. I wanted to go over it and teach you how I trade them. Now, first of all, I want to introduce myself. My name is Andrew. I've been in the challenge for over 3 years now, and I'm a six-figure student, and I've learned a lot from Tim, and I've taken what Tim teaches and I've created my own setups that I trade really well. I love panic dip buys, and I primarily trade panic dip buys. So this is what I traded today: FRC and KEY, and those are both big panic dip buys that halted on the way down. And I'm just going to go over how I trade them and how I make sure not to get burned by them, because it's very easy to get burned by them. So the stock of today was FRC. I'm going to bring that up here, and here's a chart. And this chart looks like a mess, okay? Like, it is totally messy, but there are a bunch of filters and criteria that I use to make sure that I get only the best of this setup. So first of all, I want to make sure that the market cap, when it starts the day, I include pre-market, is over $10 billion. So market cap, you can get that by multiplying shares by either the previous day's close, which is this white line here, or the top of pre-market. That's what I usually do. I see if the market cap is over $10 billion, and that just means that this is going to be most likely a real company, a legit company, and that it's going to have that bounce potential that I'm looking for. Because otherwise, if I'm trading under 10 billion, it's not as guaranteed, and there's a lot of fake outs and fake bounces that occur in that price range. So next criteria is I make sure it's not a Chinese company. I want to weed out the Chinese scams, because those tend to not bounce, and the consortium or the Chinese promoters tend to sell into dip buyers. So I want to avoid Chinese companies. If you want to learn how to weed out Chinese companies, Tim Lento goes over them a lot in his webinar, so I would recommend watching those and getting up to speed with those. And I wanted to also note that multiple halts is gold for me. Okay, so I have overlaid the halts, and each of them are around 5 minutes long. Sometimes they're longer. But as you can see on the downside, there were plenty halts on the downside here. And because of those halts, I was able to recognize that this was a A+++ setup. And the best way to trade is to only trade your best setups. And when you start out, you don't really know what setups are your best. So over time, you realize that I only have to trade my best setups, and when they do come around, to really size up so you get the most out of them. And this was a prime example of that. FRC was my A++ setup. Now, the first thing that we have to do is recognize that we need really good risk management for this type of play, especially halt panics. When something's panicking and then halting multiple times, you have to be aware that many people get caught in falling knives on these. So you want to make sure that you don't get caught on falling knives. I've been caught many times, and I've learned from that. One of the main things that you could do is draw a trend line. So here I've drawn down a downtrend line right here, where this is how it's panicking. And I usually take the top of, like, the start of the drop over here, and then I take the bottom of the drop, the top wick, and I connect those. I don't necessarily connect the very beginning, but I do connect the part that is accelerating, this accelerated downtrend. And when I see that, I want to see increasing volume. I want to see some capitulation right here. You can see that. And then obviously you can also see this on the daily chart also. You can see that capitulation volume. Sometimes I pull up the 5 minute chart. just to get some perspective. It had a capitulation volume here. And what I do is I wait. I don't buy when I think that it's bouncing. I buy when I get that nice higher low, and that's what I want. I'm going to turn off this HALT indicator just because it's good to have, but just so you can see the chart better. So what I would do, I would wait for the first green candle. So I consider this a bounce, and then what I do is I put a stop buy order over the high of this candle. So in this case, it would be 20.51. I would put a stop buy order, so I would get filled on this candle right here, and that just ensures that I get that higher low bounce, and then it starts breaking up above it, and then I'm going to be in at that level. Otherwise, I would probably be caught in a falling knife, because these really do tend to panic more than you think. And getting caught in a falling knife is not pretty. Also, I would risk the low of the day. So in this case, I would risk 17.53, just because if I risk a little bit higher, I'm more likely to get stopped out, even if it does work out, because these do tend to retrace sometimes. And that's how I enter this type of play. I want to also mention that I never hold these overnight. Now, in this case, there was bad news. There is potentially banking contagion, because another bank went under, SIVB, and so this is just bad news. I do not want to hold these overnight. There's too much risk, and I'll show you what happened to SIVB right here. It did have its a panic here, and what happened was that it didn't bounce. I was in it. I was dip buying this. It didn't bounce, and I got stopped out. I got out, and that was it, because I followed my rules. I don't hold this overnight no matter what. And what happened with SIVB, it got halted. You can't trade it. They stopped it from trading. So that is a very dangerous scenario. You do not want to be holding these overnight. It's just not worth it. This is intraday only. If you still have a position before the close, get out. Get out. Final hour of the day in power hour, just cut your position, because it's just not worth it. Okay, so now once you're in, what do you do? So in what I use percentage targets. So I calculate what the panic was, and I use the pre-market high or the previous day's close as my starting point. So I calculate the percentage panic between the bottom price here and the top price. So I either use pre-market high or I use previous day's close, and I calculate that by taking the bottom price divided by the top price minus 1. And so in this case, this gives me around minus 80% panic. And for minus 80% panics, I'm usually looking for a plus 80% bounce from the bottom. So 1753 times 1.80, that's going to be around 31 to 34. So that's going to be my target. I'm going to aim to get out into that area. And in this case, this was exactly what it bounced to. If you look at the whole chart, it actually bounced even more. FRC ended up bouncing 139% from its lows, which is more than double. So this setup has a ton of potential. I got out too early just because I wanted to be safe, and it looked like it was reversing here. So I did not want to be long when I could be taking profits into strength, a safe push into strength. So that is what I did. And I was exiting at around 32, 33 here. And that's how I made 1,000 today. I also traded another stock today, KEY, although this panic wasn't as good. It wasn't as smooth. It still did halt. It still did panic, but it's not a plus setup. But in this example, this panicked 40% from top to bottom, and I was looking for a bounce of around 20%, and so I was getting out just below 12 over here. This ended up bouncing 34%. I caught the meat of the move, and again, not an overnight hold. None of these are. That's very dangerous. FRC actually had the same setup yesterday. So FRC panicked 50% yesterday from top to bottom, and then for minus 50%, I'm looking for around a 40% bounce, and this actually bounced 112%. So it was a double, and I know I said yesterday, but this was actually on Friday, so that's what I meant. So incredible potential. Obviously not an overnight hold. Look what it did overnight. This is the panic today that happened. If you would have held it overnight, you would have been screwed if you were long. So no good. And I wanted to go over SIVB also. You had a HALT in here while it's panicking, and I was gaining in this area right here. First green candle over the trend line. After it forms a trend, I consider this area a higher low over here. So I was getting in the 118 area right here, and it did not bounce like I wanted, and so I ended up stopping out right here because my stop was here at low of day. As it broke low of day, I was out, and I was very disappointed because usually, like today, the setup works out. Today's setup worked very well, just because it had multiple halts. There were multiple halts today, and that is different from the other examples I showed, because the multiple halts here create more downside potential. So you had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 halts before it started to bounce. And that's very, very crucial for an A++ version of this setup. And I'll show you an example that happened This is an example that happened January 20th, 2021. So this was GME. And again, this had a 80% drop from its pre-market highs. And even its market open highs, it had a very large drop, probably 70% or so. And, you know, for that sort of panic, I look for an 80% bounce. And in this example, GME bounced 188%. Now, compared to FRC, Monday, FRC bounced 139%. So not as much, but this was a totally different market. But for GME, as you can see, it had those multiple halts. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 halts over here, and that capitulation volume also. So this was a very key example, textbook example of what to look for is this situation. And you will not see this very often. It might come around once a year, a couple times a year, but when you do see it, it's very important that you recognize it and you wait and are patient for the entry and you enter it correctly. And then you can have these massive bounces and you could really turn a small position into a very large position, because in this example, I was holding for an 80% gain. For most traders, that sounds ridiculous. But for me, when I see the setup, I know that that's the potential this setup has. FRC also had options. So if you were into that, you could have traded the $30 calls. This is an example. The only reason I did not trade them because they were too illiquid and choppy. As you can see from this chart, the chart is not very smooth. So that scared me away a little bit. The bottom was on the stock was a little earlier around here. So, you know, there was just too much chop. So I avoided it. But sometimes like on GME, you would be able to play the options and you would be able to have really incredible gains with that. But unfortunately, FRC did not have liquid options. So this example is PTON, and this was from January 2022. And as you can see, it had a massive panic and multiple halts. Here it had 3 halts. Once it started to bounce and put in that green candle over the downtrend line, that's when I was looking to get in onto the higher low around this area, high 24s. And also note the capitulation volume here. So that's where I was getting in, and I was getting out into this bounce over here. So this is another example, another instance. I wouldn't say that this is a plus, but I would say it's an A+ setup, because although it didn't have 8 halts down, it did have 3, and that's not that bad. So this is a scenario. I believe it had options as well, but I don't remember how good they were. Okay, so that will be it for my video lesson. I'm Andrew again. I'm in the chat all the time, and I love panic dip buys. That's pretty much all I do. I do other strategies, but with much smaller size. This is my bread and butter. So I hope this helped, and I hope when you see another setup that's like this, you know what to do. You don't catch a falling knife. You try to get in late, wait for the stock to bond first, and then you get in on a higher low, and that's your entry, and you risk the low of the day. Now, if you enjoyed this video, please comment, please leave a karma down below or a like, and also make sure to check out Androo.ca. It has all my social media, my Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok. I just post educational things. I'm not selling anything, so anything to help you become better and better. So thanks again, and I'll see you in the chat.